Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
So I was thinking that everybody should have a TED Talk in their back pocket, right? Like everybody should be ready in case they get invited to a TED Talk, and putting you 100% on the spot.
Yeah.
Do you have a TED Talk in your back pocket? What do you think your TED Talk would be?
Wow. So I've been telling my transformational story from the Hartford and what we did with NextThink, and I've had many people come up to me say, "That's your TED Talk. You got to turn that into a TED Talk." So that's not in my back pocket. That's in my front pocket.
I love it. You're one step ahead of the game, man. Like I was thinking you the exact same thing, Tim, that would be your TED Talk. And I even thought of a title, right? Like a TED-ish title. What you can't see can hurt you. No. Yeah, because as a kind of tantalizing setup. Anyway, we got. I mention it not out of the blue, but because we have a really wonderful guest today, and she has not just got a TED Talk in her back pocket. She's done the TED Talk. She's probably got another one coming up soon. Her name is Kelly Monahan. She's a director of future of work at Meta. Kelly, welcome to the DEX Show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
What was it? What was the whole TED Talk experience like then? What was that? What was the production and the whole process? What stood out to you?
Yeah, it was probably to this date one of the hardest things I've actually done. Especially as a researcher, you're trying to distill all of this understanding and knowledge and research into like the most important facts in 14 or 15 minutes. And I think one of the really cool things that I'm not sure if it was unique to the Hartford TEDx experience or if it's general across TEDx speaking, there's no script or anything. So you have to memorize everything. There's no really cue or anything like that. And so you really have to be in the moment, really making sure that you know the flow and the story. And that was really awesome for me. I mean, it's very unlike the way I usually do presentations, but it really forced me to distill what I thought was most important and do so in a way that was conversational and organic, because there is no script or anything you can read from.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really interesting. I didn't know that detail. You can kind of tell, though, now you mention it, you can tell that people aren't reading and that they are having to summon and the whole presentation from memory.
Exactly. So that, yeah, anyways, it was really cool. And the TEDx team did a wonderful job producing it and making sure everyone was prepped. And it was a great community building event, too, listening to everyone else's stories who went that day.
And I should say for listeners, your excellent TED Talk is called Future of Work Hiding in Plain Sight, which also, and they should go and check that out on YouTube. And which is also a clue, of course, in terms of who you are and what your expertise is. Well, of course, you're an expert in the future of work. You're director of future of work at Meta. And on that point, Kelly, I have to say that might be the coolest title, the most intriguing, coolest title of anybody we've ever had on the show. Love to hear about how this came about and how it's going there for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, no, I have to say, I do think I have a pretty cool job in title.
Yeah.
It was funny. It was probably actually about 9 years ago. I was at a consulting company, Deloitte, and clients actually started asking, what is the future of work going to look like? And so I got hired in as one of their first researchers, really trying to define and understand what is the future of work? What does it look like? And why all of a sudden all of this noise about it at that current time? And so I never at that time would have thought this would be a full-time job running this at an organization, especially at a company such as Meta. And so I think it's just really exciting to see how far we've come in the last decade of really making this a mature organization or function within big companies. And as you alluded to, it's hiding in plain sight with my TED Talk. We talk a lot about it being a human-centric focus. And so a lot of times we talk about future of work, we think about the technology side or the automation, AI. But instead, it's really about the human behavior change. It is really what I study, what my expertise is when it comes to the future of work.
You do have a PhD as well, I noticed. Was that was in a different area, was it? What's been the sort of like, what's been the through line through all of your professional kind of pursuits and interests?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my PhD is in organizational behavior,
Sure.
essentially how humans behave at work. And so I really, the through line in all of this is I started my career really early on as an HR generalist, actually, Tim, you'd appreciate this, at the Hartford, at the insurance company.
Cool.
And yeah, so a connection there.
Hartford reunited over here. Come on.
Yeah, all good things happen in Hartford.
Yeah.
So when I was there, again, I had no idea, right? I mean, this is like 15, 20 years ago. And my whole project was helping an office install robotic process automation so we could essentially automate a lot of the back office work that was happening in the insurance and mutual fund side, and then hire up digital skills actually in Philadelphia, which is how I ended up here, and really expand our digital sales force and marketing. And so understanding the way that technology at a very real level was displacing people, I had to go in one day and look 200 people in the eye individually and let them know that they no longer had a job. And that just shook me to my core,
Right.
right? I mean, that's when I realized, my God, work is so much more important than just a paycheck. And just seeing 200 people's reactions when they realized that that work was no longer a part of their identity, their life, completely transformed my entire understanding at a very soul level of what work is about. And so that's what led me to go get my PhD, to really understand we got to bring as much data and science to how we're making decisions about people at work. Love HR. I currently sit within HR too at Meta, but oftentimes HR is a little behind the ball when it comes to data and analytics and really using scientific approaches to make decisions about people, because it impacts the worker, their families, their communities. And I just saw that at a really real level at a young age.
That's so interesting. I had a friend who worked in HR, nicest person in the world, as I'm sure you are, and you know the job in the role of an HR professional is so often kind of very positive and nurturing and encouraging in general, but then there are these moments in the profession that require you to effectively wield the axe, right? Where you have to
Yes.
do so. In her case and in other cases, it looked so incongruous to their nature and to the rest of the job. It must be a really difficult thing to do.
Yes, I think it's probably, I mean, all jobs are difficult, but I think the emotional toil on this one
Mm.
can be very difficult because you do have to make the hard decisions. And unlike some of my finance counterparts or IT, it's like you're dealing with inanimate objects. So there's no emotions, there's no feelings. You either run the software, buy the software, or you don't. You make a budget cut or you don't. When it comes, we're dealing with a human, and so I think that's what makes it very difficult at times
The other
and
dy-
messy.
the other dynamic there, Tom, is Hartford now is like 212 years old. So
Yeah.
they're in their third century of business, and the employees there are not just employees; they're stewards of that brand. They are very
Yes.
dedicated to that storied, long-running company in New England, and an event like that, especially for that number of people, is traumatic in all kinds of different ways.
Absolutely.
You didn't fire Timbo, did you, Kelly? That
He
wasn't
was
something
not
that
my
happened.
list.
Okay. Well, I mean, now you find yourself at Meta, Kelly, and that's a
Yeah.
fascinating place to be. I mean, when you think about Meta's kind of former incarnation, right,
Yep.
as Facebook, right, it was obviously this extraordinary advertising and promotional platform. It was also kind of definitively the platform of leisure, or
Hmm.
of not being at work, if you will, or of being at work and not working is another way to put it. You know, you had LinkedIn was a professional platform. Twitter kind of has always managed to span both quite well.
Yep.
Facebook was that other thing. I mean, how do you see that evolving now under the Meta banner and with kind of
Yeah.
Meta's renewed sense of expanded mission, if you will?
Yeah. I think you said that's such a thoughtful question. And really, one of the reasons why I decided to come over to Meta is the thing that Meta is focused on right now is really creating social presence. So, taking all of the goodness, let's call it, the social media platform and everything that we know about human connection and how that manifests itself in a digital environment, taking our understanding of that and applying it to the work setting. And, I saw this a couple years ago before COVID happened, before, a lot of us then went into remote environment. And so as I saw at the time, Facebook and now Meta really trying to translate that human connection, that social presence in a digital environment, that to me is the future of work. I mean, that is something that I've been studying for the last decade, and actually seeing a company start to build the infrastructure and products and services in place that would actually facilitate that. I had to come be a part of this and see it firsthand and hopefully help guide and influence the decision making we'll be making. Because for me, again, I study human behavior. So, how does our human behavior change at work when we're meeting each other up in the metaverse or we're meeting each other up as avatars? How does that change? How does that dynamics play? How do we make sure that we create a more equalized playing field, and everyone has a sense of belonging in this environment? And so, what can we take about all of our past behavior and mistakes that we have had for, as part of humankind, and then actually start to course correct and create a better environment as much as possible? And so that's why I'm here. And I think as I think about Meta, it's really translating this now into a work environment because that leisure and work has blended across all of our lives in so many ways. And I think the pandemic has almost accelerated that need to really get this social presence right when we're so, when we're bound by location. Our community became so small during COVID, but our technology and our digital environments allowed us to maintain that social presence with our loved ones without putting ourselves in harm. And so, as devastating as the past couple of years have been, it's also really accelerated us from a work perspective of what this could look like in the future.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue. It's where I was going to go. That kind of the wider trend, the pandemic seemed to exacerbate it, and we've caught this now. There's fewer and fewer distinctions between work and leisure, or physical workplace and physical home. We see that kind of in society as dissolving, but are the tech giants adopting more of that integrated approach too? And I'll give you an example of where I think some maybe are in your case and others aren't. The users of, and I don't think this is intentional on LinkedIn, but the users of LinkedIn are not very accommodating at all of a post that they feel should normally be on Facebook. That doesn't belong here. It's not work related. Get it out of here, put it on Facebook. But I think that Meta is kind of trying to change that attitude on your platform, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy and great example. And it is funny, like we form these social norms, right? Like I don't think necessarily LinkedIn as a company set out to do that, but we as people using it have created these self-constructed social norms of what it's meant for. Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is if you think about, again, I come back to the human, the identity. I think for so long we've had this faux separation that I am a certain person at work and this is my work identity and it lives within this, physical proximity. And then I have this whole other separate identity with my family and friends and whatever that looks like. And those were always like a false dichotomy that we were always the same person. And I think instead what we're realizing is it's a lot easier. And you've seen all this movement too about like the authentic self and all of that, which I've got some mixed feelings on. But at the end of the day, the more that you can just bring yourself and who you are in both work and personal and having that blend, I actually think is healthy. It allows us to do a lot less covering of who we are, and it really allows us to blend our worlds. I think the separation was always somewhat false in many ways, and I think it was leading to burnout. So I think this is an opportunity to really reset the norms of what it means to be a worker. Where does work fit in our identity and as part of our life? How much energy do we give towards that? And how much do we allow our personal lives to come back into work and making that a safe
Right.
environment and psychological safety to have that? When it works, it's a beautiful thing. And I think you can have some really great human connection, but not all environments are set up to be a safe place to do that.
So Kelly, I suppose when we think about Meta, it's still kind of a relatively new brand name, right? Everyone knows Facebook, but Metaverse Meta is still out there. And when you hear Meta, the first thing that, at least for me, that comes to mind is Metaverse. So is that kind of intentional? Talk to us about that dynamic going forward, and maybe specifically about AR, and how do you see it really pertaining to the future workplace in a general sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So, yes, I mean, absolutely intentional as we think about Meta's vision and mission, it is to go into the metaverse. And again, really, as we think about that, and what does this mean for work, is that we're no longer bound by location in order to connect to each other, to our work. And again, it's that blending of that physical and digital environments that really allow us to do new and creative things. And I think this also, I mean, part of the mission too is ensuring as we think about the new economic infrastructure that will occur within the metaverse and really making sure that we're allowing it so more creators can come in and create digital goods and services and really have a creators environment is very much top of mind for us as we think about, again, just new types of work and all the different types of work that can be done within this infrastructure and space. Now, again, can all jobs be done in the metaverse? I'm not sure everything can be done. So I also want to always, every time I do a podcast or talk about the future of work, always recognize that there's always going to be a segment of our workforce that has to show up to a physical location because of the nature of the job. And so I think that's an important distinction to make for as well, that this will not necessarily encompass all of work, but I think a majority of, especially the knowledge work that we do today, that's really just one dimensional. You remember during when COVID first hit, all the Zoom fatigue that happened, like that social presence was not occurring through these one-way digital screens. So I just think that's when I think about the future of work in the metaverse. It's being able to connect in a very human way without necessarily being in the same presence.
Tom, I'll let you jump in too, but it even makes you think differently. I think early on, I was thinking, that there are, like you said, there are going to be jobs that can't translate, like fashion and clothing and jewelry. Those are physical things. But people create the digital version of it and actually sell it and make money. It's amazing to me. Real estate, that can't possibly go virtual. Oh my God, there's millionaires selling virtual real estate. It's crazy.
And just like from an economic perspective, it's going to be such a different way of thinking about commerce and the way we do business. I mean, we're so bound by scarcity. And I guess, a lot of the argument is, well, attention, it's going to be the scarcity element of this, but we're going to be entering into an economics of abundance. And what does that mean when it's no longer necessarily a scarce resource? And I think that's where you've got some of the NFTs coming in and trying to bring an element of scarcity behind that, because that is typically how human behavior and economics have worked.
Actually, talking about the sort of the human dimension a bit more, from your TED talk, Kelly, I did hear a quote I really, really liked. It was that boredom was as dysfunctional as stress. Really, really powerful few words there. When we think about work and the metaverse in general, what are some of the potential human impacts, positive and negative, around things like boredom and stress that we need to anticipate and consider?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's funny. I mean, that quote from that TED Talk, I had the opportunity to really work closely with a neuroscientist who really illuminated for me and my understanding that a lot of times our brains don't differentiate the way that we manifest hormones and chemical reactions. So whether it was boredom or stress, our brain typically responds in a very similar manner. And so I think what's going to be interesting as we start thinking about the metaverse is, again, what sort of reaction are we going to have as human beings as we come out of a very physical, natural environment and move into a digital environment? We've seen some manifestations of that again in the technology that we have today. But I think some watchouts is absolutely inclusion. How do we make sure? I mean, we as humans don't probably do a great job naturally, anyways, even when we're all together with in group and out group dynamics. So, how is that going to manifest itself? As people are not necessarily showing up as currently, at least right now within the metaverse, more so as an avatar, do we become more bold? I mean, we've seen that right with some of the social media effects too, where people tend to say things that maybe they wouldn't have if it was an in-person communication or conversation. So how do we make sure that we keep our good human qualities about us as we go about our business, as opposed to manifesting or amplifying some things that we're not so good at times? And so I think for me, it's so early on, and this is such new emergent phenomenon to really begin to understand and study, but the way we behave is going to change with an environment. I mean, I think that's some basic social psychology, that our environment influences our behavior. This is a brand new environment. This is a new frontier for us. But as humankind, this is what we do. We continue to evolve. We continue to create and explore new frontiers and environments. And I think as psychologists and social psychologists, we've got to quickly understand how that behaves and how that changes the way we interact with one another.
And I always go back to being an IT guy myself. I go back to the profession of being in information, being in that information technology profession. When you think of IT and the professional workplace technologists, what does that, what are the future prospects of the profession look like to you? What's in it for the IT pros out there to kind of embrace this new tech now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one of the pros from an IT perspective is going to be the data and the digital exhaust we're going to all create. As we think about, and again, we have to do this in a way that's not creepy, not invasive. So, huge ethical guard right there. But we can actually, as humans, like looking at behavioral economics, we know we're not really good at predicting or really making good guesses of even who we are sometimes and how we're going to behave. And so we're going to have, a lot of times in the manufacturing space, they've had digital twins where you can, create and build a predictive model. We're going to be potentially, right? I mean, one of the maybe promises in the IT realm is we might be able to create human digital twins where we can actually see in a digital environment our digital exhaust, how we behave, how do we react, and actually become so much more intelligent about ourselves, our workforces, our products. So that to me, I think is a really new frontier for us. Is getting a really just deeper understanding of ourselves, the way we work and the way we interact with each other in a very real way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for IT just to get that right and make sure that's done in a very ethical manner. And then I also think, again, obviously, well, the cloud technologies, I mean, IT has already probably been the most distributed function in an organization, not bound by location, but their ability to do that and even have a better experience with their customers and employees, I think is going to continue to be amplified. as we think about the way IT can actually show up in the metaverse as well.
What a cool concept of digital exhaust, not only in its definition of what it is, but how IT can leverage mining that data, as you said, in an ethical way to learn something about not just us as people, but the larger community of people and what we're doing. It's pretty cool.
Very cool. A lot of people at the moment, Kelly, are saying that due to the economic kind of horizon and such, like the period we've just gone through, frequently called the Great Resignation, is drawing to a close. I mean, it must have been a fascinating phenomenon for you to witness from your professional expert perspective. How do you reflect on this period of the last 2 years at this point, and how do you see it morphing or developing next?
Yeah, I think, I'm cautiously optimistic, I think is what I'm going to say about this. So I did my TED Talk 3 months before COVID-19 hit. And at the time, future of work, as we're thinking about like the state of the workforce, burnout was on the rise, stress levels were on the rise. And there was just this overall narrative and sentiment that either automation and robots were coming for people's jobs and or people were engaged in a lot of meaningless work. Fast forward, COVID-19 hits, the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden, new concerns arise about work. It was so much less about the job and task itself and much more about safety and managing a global pandemic. And at the time, I actually got the opportunity to work with 15 CIOs, chief information officers, when I was at Accenture. And we were studying in real time how they were going to take their 18 to 24-month digital transformation roadmaps, where companies were slowly trying to enable remote work in a more distributed manner. And these people had to, actually execute this over a weekend. And I remember there were stories of people carrying like their actual physical desktop out of their offices into their homes and, calling IT to get support and set up. And we did it. And for the most cases, the jobs that were enabled to be remote happened and business happened. We actually had higher productivity levels. Obviously, commerce and consumerism was at an all-time high as well. And so I think as we progress into the future, my concern is I see some companies reverting back to pre-COVID norms. There's been a lot of news, even within the tech industry, of tech workers being forced back into the office a certain number of days. And I guess my fear is we knew we needed a reset of norms. We know from 100 years of work, we've adopted a lot of the industrial era norms and behaviors. And if we don't reset now, this is our opportunity to reset, especially work that can be and should be done from a remote perspective or with more autonomy and flexibility. I think this is a huge opportunity to reset norms of work and what that means to be a worker today. And I'm fearful a lot of companies might be incentivized or looking just to go back to that normal rhythm as opposed to letting a new emergent rhythm form that's better for both society, people, workers, and customers.
It's the whole thing about new technology, right? It involves a certain amount of getting people to think differently, and the old school execs that are having tough time embracing technology and thinking differently are also having a tough time embracing and thinking differently about where their employees are. And it's a shame because it's so much more productive.
It is. And I think, and again, like one of the things we're dealing here at Meta, which again attracted me to come over and lead this future of work research, is I also don't want it to be an either or. I mean, so much of this is right, depending on where you are in life, your lifestyle. And so we also want to create thriving, vibrant offices. So if people choose to come back to the office, we want to make sure that's a healthy environment and that's a place that you can be productive and innovative and connect. But if you choose to also be at home, we want to make sure that that remote environment is set up for success too. So I think a lot of this, like executives get caught, it has to be an either or. And our mindset has really been, is the future of work, let's blend into this and make this an and that we're going to trust people are going to do the right thing and work in an area, an environment that makes them most productive that particular day.
Without a doubt. So the bigger question right now, I think, and maybe to close things out, we've kind of been circling around this one anyway, but what's your particular view, your personal view of the future of work, and how should our understanding and anticipation of that future work, how should we shift? What's the advice?
So it's funny. I mean, as you think about future of work, there's always going to be a future of work. So one of the things I talk a lot about is like, what time horizon are we talking about? Do you want to talk about the future of work of like what's happening in the next 6 months? Or do we want to predict what's going to happen in the next 10 years and how that's going to shift? So I think for me, as I think about the future of work, and I encourage, people to, and executives and listeners out there, figure out the time horizon. I think there's so much noise and just chaos in the conversation right now that oftentimes is unproductive. So figure out the time horizon. In the next 6 to 12 months, I think most businesses are grappling with very location-based decisions. What do we do with our real estate space? How do we continue to enable remote work at scale? And I hope when I think about the future of work, going a year out from now, I think about it much more in terms of our behavioral norms. How do we reinvent leadership so that our managers don't feel the need to be co-located, and that they can trust their people to still work? What does distributed leadership look like? How do we get really good with async collaboration and really embracing distributed, first working norms? And then how do we get really good at sync collaboration? So whether you're in a VC room in an office or you're remote, that appears seamless. And again, that social presence is happening, no matter where you might be collaborating from. That to me is, I think, some of the next questions. And again, that requires a really big reset in our leadership norms, the way we think about work, and really our trust around people. And then if you zoom out further, 5+ years, that's where we start getting, I think, into the metaverse. And that's where I think we're going to start seeing companies adopt this at scale. We're seeing it whether it's with training and learning and even in classrooms, where we have embraced a more blend of physical and digital elements, and we're able to really realize that social presence that we're just beginning to experience here and there right now. But that to me is the promise of the future of work, where people are truly being able to stay connected, being able to be productive, and no longer bound by location or even social economic status in order to actually contribute and be creative in meaningful ways.
Love it.
Yeah, fantastically well said, Kelly. And a real delight to have you on the show. I should just say to listeners who do want to explore further that really fascinating intersection between augmented reality, the metaverse, call it what you will, with IT, with the future of digital employee experience in general, they must go to the DEX show, DEX Hub mothership, and check out some really, really outstanding featured articles we have there. I'll make sure we include some links in the show notes. Other than that, Kelly, we'd love to have you on again in the future. Thanks so much for joining us on the DEX show. And best of luck with TED Talk number 2. I feel that it's time. Really, I do.
Oh, it needs to be updated.
Thanks, Kelly. Take care.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.